Base building is a major part at any survival game. However, Sons of the Forest did base building in a way I thought was creative and intuitive.
Base building in Sons of the Forest, I feel like is very middle of the road when it comes to base building style. You have a lot of creativity you can do. You have some basic blueprints you can put down, but it's not like other survival games in the sense that some have blueprints where you can only build a specific structure after putting a blueprint down, and then other base building games like Enshrouded where you can build down to the tiniest voxel.
I think that that's an important distinction is that the Sons of the Forest allows you to be really customizable and it is middle of the road. There is some template to it. However, there's a lot of creativity and customization to it. Like you can place down the very starting log of your base anywhere you want. It could be in a mountain, it could be side of a hill, it could be on the beach, or you can even put it inside the water a little bit and start building outward. Of course, you'll eventually reach a restriction because you can't build that deep down in the ocean. But it is cool because it allows a customization while still having a little bit of rigidness to it.
They give you basic blueprints where you can build certain structures like log cabins, tree houses, lean-tos, small campsites. So you don't have to invest a ton of time into building a base if you don't want to. But like you said, you can also start your own base and build your own base based on where you want to build. Now, you still have to build in like a grid pattern. It's not all squares. You can do ramps and steps and things like that, but it's still in a grid pattern. You still have to follow the square grid when you build.
But then inside of your booklet, you can actually place like stick holders, log holders, bone holders, all these different types of holders, as well as like decorations like beds, stools, chairs, and even traps. Now, these stuff is, a template or a blueprint that you add items to. However, you can place them anywhere you want. And of course, with some restrictions, like you can't put, a campfire just inside of the ocean, but you have a lot of freedom even with the templates themselves for the furniture and traps.
That's where the customization comes in. That's where the creativity comes in. And being able to place these things where you want them and do what you want with them and design your own city if you want to. Now, again, like you said, there's restrictions, there's certain terrain you can't build on and things like that. But as long as you pick a good area to build, you can pretty much do what you want.
Yeah, and one of the things that I find super awesome about this is that you can make multiple bases throughout the entire island. You're not stuck to I put down a flag, this is the only place I can build it, and it doesn't really affect your performance at all. Like I have made some monstrous spaces myself and I have had no performance impact. That's another important thing that Sons of the Forest does right is they made their base building pretty well optimized.
If you're going to build multiple bases, one suggestion is to make sure you put down a marker on your map. And the thing about Sons of Forest is you can't just go in and put a marker on your map. You got to put a GPS locator there. Because if you don't put a GPS locator at your base, you're going to wander off at some point. And if you're like me, you're going to get lost and you'll never find that base again. And you just got to start over.
It's going to definitely be a struggle sometimes because there are cons to Sons of the Forest base building. And one of the cons, in my opinion, is it is grindy. Even with Kelvin helping you, which is one of the NPCs who's around, you still have to deforest a large area. And mind you, it's satisfying to watch these trees fall. But after you're like 12th, 30th, maybe 100th tree, you're kind of done with the ambiance of the tree cracking and falling and crushing and stuff. I mean, it is kind of cool if you accidentally hit your base when you're first building, but it kind of sucks when Kelvin drops one on your base.
That's why I let Kevin do most of the work of gathering the supplies because I can design and I can build and I can put stuff where I want and let him do the hard work. Let him do the heavy lifting. Yes, I have to stop and yell at him from time to time because he'll go sit down or he'll go be lazy and I have to get him back to work, but that's beside the point. I think my two big cons with base building in Sons of the Forest is if you're not careful in the beginning, especially laying a foundation, and you place something incorrectly, it can throw off your entire base and you won't know it until you get ready to put a certain aspect on the base. For example, when I was building my base in my solo world, I put down a big, large foundation. I got the walls up around the edges. and I got ready to put the roof on. And to put the roof on, you got to put columns in and you got to put cross beams before you can put the actual stone or wood on the roof. Well, when I got 6 columns in, I got to the middle area to put my columns in, and I realized I had put something on the floor wrong on the foundation, and I couldn't find the right spot where I put it wrong. So I had to take everything out of that floor in the floor grid and rebuild the floor just so I could put a roof on my place. That was a big struggle because I put a lot of time into building that base only to have to tear it all back up and re-put the flooring down just so I could put a roof on. The only other really big con that I find makes base building difficult is if you end up having to build a base during the winter. One of the things that I find very necessary for building a base is all the storage things that we talked about before, and you need sticks to build those. Sticks are very extremely hard to collect when the ground is covered in snow.
And the other thing that I kind of hate about the base building in Sons of the Forest is kind of the waste you get when you're building up the logs. You end up cutting a lot of them either to quarters or halves, but you end up not making use of that at all. I think the only time I ever make use of it is when I make a triangle like corner piece or a triangle ramp, and it uses the small split plank logs because you can split the logs and use that as your flooring or stairs or your ramp, but that's the only time I'm really using it. Otherwise, I'm just chopping it into firewood, which don't get me wrong, it's nice I can do that. But the reality of it is I almost pretty much just end up just chucking them over the ridge. I'm pretty sure there's some person, down the river cannibal wise going, why is there a bunch of logs down here and why they're all odd shapes?
Only other thing that I can think of that you can use those little quarter pieces for are window shades or window shutters. You can make those if you cut windows into your stone walls or your wooden walls. But again, that's not really enough use for the amount of those pieces that you might end up with by the time you finish your base.
Yeah, but the base isn't just for aesthetics or a place to call, home. It's also a place for you to save and actually cook and store valuables because, like, it's not just base building storage. There's grenades, there's weapons, there's arrow storage, there's spear storage. There's even traps to defend against the cannibals who are going to eventually come and start raiding. I think the raiding mechanics of your base in this game are quite awesome because it rewards you when you put a lot of effort into making the palisade logs, splitting them to make the spikes so they can't jump on top of them, or even making it so they have to jump over smaller palisades and they jump into a trap because you set it up perfectly that they didn't see it. I think the base building in this rewards the player because the cannibals and other NPCs have to think about how to attack your base.
You bring up storage and stuff like that. The If you're playing with other people, you can end up gathering enough loot to where you need a separate base just to build the shelving units to store all of the extra loot that you have. Because at some point you max out on storage on certain items, and you need a place to put them. I've There's been a couple of servers I've played on where we've had just one room full of the shelving units just for all the extra stuff that we have in our pockets or in our backpack.
Well, you heard it here, folks. He made an armory. He had an armory.
That's the other thing. I'm glad you brought up the traps and the walls because you talked about the deforesting just for the base, but you have to build if you build those walls and even the spiked walls and the gates, that's even more logs that you have to chop down and more lumber that you have to have. But if you don't make those, then your base is even more susceptible to being torn down because you don't, as far as I understand, you don't only get raided when you're at home. When you go out into the caves and start exploring these caves and getting these extra materials and stuff, not only do you open up attacks to not just the cannibals, but the mutants, but you can also have your base, as far as I understand, being attacked while you're gone. That base that I said that I spent a lot of time on and retore up the floor and had to relay the floor and all of that stuff, my current save, I got to a point where I was happy with it and I was like, all right, I want to go explore. I went into the caves, can't find that base anymore. They've either completely destroyed it or they've at least torn down the thing that marks it as home base because contrary to my own advice, I didn't put a GPS marker on it. Can't find my home base anymore, so I have to build a brand new one. I have to start from scratch.
Womp, womp, womp. But I actually think that there are some other clever ways that Sons of the Forest have made base building pretty cool. And one of the thing is when you find the grappling tool. it really shoots a grappling hook with a rope attached to it, and you can use that to zip line between areas. And it's really cool because you can't only just transport yourself, you can transport resources like logs and large stones. Now, being clever, I built a log storage and a stone storage at the other end of the rope up on the second floor. So when I sent up logs and stones, they just fell right into the log storage or the stone storage. It was pretty clever. But even in PvP or PvE situations, having the ability to escape from your base and like flank them from around the corner is pretty cool. Being able to shoot a grappling rope from standing on top of the roof of your base into a tree and then sticking it into one of your logs and then just ziplining out of your base like MacGyver. It's pretty awesome.
When you mentioned that you could do that, it blew my mind because I didn't know you could do that. I never realized that I knew you had the grappling tool. I knew you could zip line across. I didn't know you could send materials across to your base and send materials down the zip line to other areas. That's fantastic because that actually makes me want to go back in Sons of the Forest and build a base up on platforms or up in the trees so that I can do stuff like that and I can live above the cannibals. Then I don't have to worry about anything. I don't have to go in the caves. I don't have to go find all the crap in the game. I can just thrive up in the trees.
Yeah, but little does he know, folks, the cannibals can actually destroy the very foundations of your base and it'll come crumbling down. But moving on, I think Sons of the Forest, while it's not a perfect base building system, I believe it still adds enough control to the player and customization while keeping kind of that cookie cutter feel that it's quality of life and intuitive for players to use. Is it the perfect system? No. But I think it goes into that Goldilocks zone just enough to make base building kind of more viable in the survival game. And honestly, I think a lot of other survival games can look at it and go, how can I make base building fun, intuitive, but still make the player feel like they have a lot of control over how they build?
I think it's awesome that you can go as complex as you want, or you can go as simple as you want. Like we said earlier, you can have the blueprints that give you the basic shelters that allow you to save and sleep, or you can build this big metropolis up in the trees or down on the ground and spend as much time gathering resources and as much time building as you want. All to have it destroyed by cannibals at some point, but that's we're not going to talk about that right now. We're talking about how good the base is. The only thing I think that I would really love to see and that I wish this had that would just be like the icing on the cake would be terraforming. If you could flatten the area that you want to build at or remove some of the bigger rocks or logs that are on the ground in your way, that would make, I won't say perfect, but that would make Sons of the Forest base building just so much better.
Well, folks, that is our wrap up of base building and how we think Sons of the Forest did it right. Join me in thanking Dimension 119 and Red Falcon for being here and helping us run the State of Survival podcast. Thank you very much for watching. Ta ta for now.
See you in another dimension.